My name is Alicia Penizato, and I'm the Executive Director of Story International. Story International began 6 years ago, and I remember those early days really well. It was just a couple of us, and we were young, and we had crazy ideas of how we wanted to change the world. And we started by building a bilingual elementary school here in Guatemala. And pretty quickly after that, the longer we lived here, the more we got to know the context. We just started to do more and more and more. Before we knew it, we were actually running a children's home here in Huehue. It's hard to exactly explain what that experience was like running an orphanage. I think I would use the word excruciating. It was really, really beautiful at moments, and other times it was totally devastating. And I think overall, it was mostly frustrating. We really felt like we were doing the best we could. We wanted to run this excellent children's home. We wanted it to feel like family, but we kind of felt like we were running in circles. And that tension grew over the years, but we felt a little bit stuck in it. It was what we knew to do, and so we just kept doing it. Part of the reason that we were growing so frustrated was we were beginning to identify these patterns. For example, a child would leave our care, and then 6 months later, that child would be back in our care. Or we would get a new case and the court would let us know that that child's mom also grew up at a children's home. Or, we'd get a call and the court would be asking if we could take a set of 5 siblings, and we would say, "I'm so sorry, we don't have space." And they would say, "Well, nowhere else does either." So it just felt like this pattern, it felt like this cycle, and we really felt like there was no end in sight. It started to beg the question, is this really moving us any closer to a long-term solution to this problem? And then for us, that tension and that frustration kind of came to a point when on March 8th of 2017, a fire broke out at a children's home here in Guatemala. I remember that day so clearly. I remember reading about it on a news app actually, and then going to work that day at the orphanage, and I'm talking about it with my coworkers. And there was just this moment where it hit me. There was a fire at a children's home. And then we started hearing numbers. First it was 7, and then it was 13, and then it was 21, and then that number eventually rose to 41 girls that were burned alive at a children's home that had promised to keep them safe. It felt like a horror movie. It felt so surreal, and for us, then it went from numbers to names. And we learned that we knew one of the 41. She had been in our care, and her siblings still were. I just remember being nauseous. I remember screaming at the top of my lungs, like, how? And there's this moment that I will never forget where I am holding this girl's youngest sibling on my hip, and she's weeping, and we're burying her. And I just remember in that moment, I didn't know what was gonna change or what had to change, but I just remember thinking, like, never again. Like, this can never happen again. The fire was a literal smoke signal. This brought light to one of Guatemala's darkest areas. And it made us ask the questions. Why were there 800 kids living at that home? Why were they undocumented and lost in the system? And why did those girls die? We can't bring those girls back. We cannot undo the fire. But what we can do is we can fight for the other 153 million orphans in this world. After a lot of prayer and a lot of research and a lot of reflection, really thinking back through the 6 years that we spent in the context of a Guatemalan orphanage, we ultimately landed on this one thing, that kids need family. We believe it is God's design. We believe it is the best design. The reality is, if we want to see an end to the global orphan crisis in our generation, then we have to broaden our lens, because it is just not sustainable to continue to build orphanages, and I don't believe that that is getting us any closer to a long-term solution. At Story International, one of our primary areas of focus is family preservation and strengthening. So we believe that every effort should be made to prevent family separation We believe that a child should never be placed in an orphanage simply because of poverty or lack of resources. So our goal is to intervene before separation ever has to occur. We offer professional psychological support from our Christian counselor, we offer financial support, and we offer scholarships. We really believe that a quality education is so vital when we're thinking about preventing family separation, which is why the School of Hope is our longest standing program. We truly believe that quality education has the power to actually break generational cycles of poverty. We recognize that it is not always possible to prevent family separation, and sometimes a child does have to be removed from their situation for their own safety and well-being. When that does happen, we do provide short-term residential care so that our team of professionals can work to determine if that child is able to be safely reunified with their biological or extended family, or if we need to look to alternative family-based solutions. Our goal is that no child spends more than 6 months in residential care. And so that means we have to get creative, because a lot of times family reunification is either messy and a long-term process, or it is not possible. So at that point, we have to expand our idea of family to include foster families and adoptive families. So that is where we have to look to the local church. This is the part of our work that really, really excites us, because once the local church starts carrying out its biblical mandate to care for the orphan, that is where we see true sustainable impact. In working with the local church, we focus on a couple of different things. First, we build relationship. And then we begin to educate, because we cannot expect people to respond to an issue that they may or may not know exists. But our goal is not just to present the problem, we want to be working together toward a solution, so we also provide practical resources so that the church can then respond. Once we enter into partnership with a local church, we then invite the families of that congregation to respond by considering and pursuing adoption or foster care, or encouraging and walking alongside another family who is already doing that. This is a war. This is a war for an entire generation of children that we might lose if we can't solve this problem. There are 153 million orphans in the world, and that is a big number. But the church is also really big. What would it look like if every single person who professes faith in Jesus Christ stood up and said, "No more"? If that happened, we would see an end to the orphan crisis in our generation. We dream of a day where orphanages are shutting down all across Guatemala because the local church is standing up and saying, "This is our responsibility." We dream of a day where a fire in a children's home is unheard of. We really dream of a day where every single child is cared for in the context of family.